Jon, a really warm welcome to Pull Up a Chair. Today's conversation is all around sustainable growth, but before I kick off on that topic, I can't not acknowledge the experience that you've just been through as chair of GSK with the pandemic and the extraordinary perspective that you would have had sitting where you are. You've talked about resilience in the financial sector on the back of the crisis in 2008 and how everybody learned. And I think that one of the things we did learn out of the last 2.5 years is that we've got a long way to go with health. And, and there's a lot more to do. So with that in mind, and in the context of sustainable communities, economy, ecosystems, what do you think the world needs to do to prepare and build resilience so that we're ready for the next one?
Well, firstly, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. That's a very big question. I think in the context of COVID, I think it was a remarkable episode of many parts of the world coming together to solve a problem, and a problem on a global scale. I think from the outset, it was never anticipated that a COVID vaccine would be available within a year. And indeed, I think I and many in the industry felt that it would be a number of years. But the pace of the development of technology, was extraordinary. And it was solved because government, academia, researchers and industry came together to solve a problem. So we can do these things when we need it. But I think the really big question is, have we built the lessons the learnings that we should have had? And there, I think I'm a little less optimistic. Many of the pandemic machinery that the UK built, a lot of it's been dismantled. So the testing network and so on, and also I think in many aspects in the world, we've not retained it, because what really faces us, we were quite lucky with COVID in many ways because there was a vaccine that was relatively easily available. If this were antimicrobial resistance or a much more virulent virus, then I think, it would have been much tougher. And when you look at the global architecture, the challenges the world faces to get vaccines to the world, we got vaccines to the developed world. We got vaccines to the countries that could afford it. We didn't get it to the parts of the world that really needed it. And I think there's still a lot of reflection necessary to prepare for the next one. And I think we need to build detection, we need to build rapid responses, and we really need to understand how do we distribute vaccines to the people in the world who really, really need them. And especially as you think that many in this country and other countries have now had their fourth booster vaccine, and most of the world still remains unvaccinated.
Absolutely. And I think the point you make around collaboration at scale is really important, and the lessons that we're learning from that. But coming back to the one thing that the pandemic has highlighted, which you really nicely articulated, is inequality.
Yes.
And inequality across the world. Do you think that sustainable growth in the sort of broader sense in terms of sustainable economies, communities, systems, is possible where access to opportunity and healthcare and finance is still so difficult and so imbalanced? And there is an absolute connection between financial prosperity and the health of a community or a workforce?
No, the answer is no, we're not equitable. But I think it's just not in the pharmaceutical industry. It's not just necessarily globally. If you go back to COVID in the UK, there was some really, really good work that was done on the genetic analysis of the virus, and there were some fascinating conclusions about, which parts of the population were genetically exposed to have a worse reaction. But actually, if you stand back and you say, take the totality of the deaths in the UK, the determinants were not genetic, they were social. They were social determinants, and it really depended on what job you did, were you actually able to work from home, where you lived, were you in Were you able to separate yourself from other family members or other people? So concentration of housing. People who had poor diets, were overweight, had other comorbidities, did worse off. So actually, even within the case of the UK, the outcome of COVID was more determined by social factors than they were genetic factors. And I think, we have to really deeply reflect on that as to, the people that are most vulnerable, did they really get what they needed? And that was just in this country. And if you then extrapolate it across the world, then I think you really see that the social drivers of health are really, really important, and we don't really address them.
And actually, I would love to pick up on that social element when we come to talk about business and the role of business in that, because you're absolutely right. There is a real connection to the two. But I just wanted to pick up on life sciences. You have absolutely said that the UK led the world in the sector during the pandemic and has a real opportunity to thrive and grow. And what we need is investment. And what we need is growth in the sector. I know you're very involved in the government's life sciences vision. You're also very vocal on the importance of, financing scale-up opportunities, innovative businesses, and also you've been vocal around the pensions reform too. So there's so many different things, so many aspects of that. I was just wondering whether you would be able just to sort of, in terms of the UK, to maintain our reputation. What is it we need to do here?
Well, I think firstly, you're absolutely right in saying the UK did outperform. And it outperformed the entire world. And if you look at the contribution that the US made, proportionally was significantly less than the UK. One of the three effective vaccines came from the UK. All of the variants that determined the mutation of the pathogen came from UK sequencing. It came from, the UK's ability to measure at that micro level changes in the protein. We did the clinical trials that determined all the alternative use pharmaceuticals that would benefit against COVID. So it was a very, very substantial contribution. And I was very lucky, and I consider myself incredibly fortunate to be asked by Prime Minister then, together with Professor John Bell, who was by far the most outstanding scientist, I think one of the outstanding scientists through this period, to develop a science strategy for the UK. And we literally built it on those success factors. What was it that led the UK to outperform? Well, number one, it was because the government, the academic institutions, the NHS, industry, the charities were all united in the pursuit of one mission, which was to mitigate the impacts of COVID. And our strategy is simply that. It is simply that. If we can do it once, why can't we continue to do it? And if we can do it for COVID, why can't we do it for obesity and cardiovascular health? Why can't we do it for early detection of cancer? Why can't we do it for mental health? Why can't we do it for neurodegeneration and aging? Why can't we do it for respiratory factors? And actually, that is exactly the UK strategy: government, academia, industry, to come to solve those problems, because that is the health burden. That is the we're talking about the social determinants of health. That is what social deprivation means, that you suffer from many of those diseases, not just one, but multiple effects. And so we are bringing the science base together with the government, with fantastic government support, to rebuild the spirit of COVID against those areas that really matter. And we're looking for joint participation. The government will lead. The government will set the initial funding. Industry will come in, and let's see if we can, change the face of the health of the UK and the health of the world by a very similar means. Health for the UK, there's a triple dividend, and you don't find that very often. There is the prize created by innovation. The rewards of innovation. 2, modern therapeutics or diagnostics significantly improves the process of diagnostics. You can get it right first time. Just think what it saves from most people. And then thirdly, the healthy population is a big productivity lever for the country, and we need plenty of those productivity leaders. But to your other side of that question, there are a number of things that we have to do, and we have to do much better. We have to allocate the science resources more efficiently against the things that matter. We have to make the NHS pro-innovation. We have to recognise that the biggest health asset the UK has is its data. And then finally, and this is to the point you raised about finance, we have to fund the scale-up phase of entrepreneurialism. We're great at starting companies. We're not very good at building big companies. And as you know, I've worked my life in healthcare and in finance. Those two industries don't intersect at all. And there is literally no finance provided by UK institutions into the startup and scale-up phase of UK life sciences. And that has to change. And it will change with pension reform. It will change with recognizing that there's another asset class alongside equities and bonds.
So I feel really optimistic, actually, as I look forward to the changes that are likely to happen. And thank you for your voice in that and making that sort of really front of the agenda, because funding scale-ups is really important for the economy as a whole. Right? This is our army of innovators that will help us deliver sustainable growth in the UK economy and globally, and achieve the ambitions that you've talked about. You talked about the UK being a real sort of centre of deep medical research. But the one thing that struck me as you were talking about the academia, the government, the business coalition working together is purpose.
Yes.
And you have also been very vocal on purpose and what purpose means for businesses, not just and the stakeholders at large, but in particular employees, and the importance of purpose. Would you mind elaborating?
You learn many lessons through your career, and I wouldn't have said this a long time ago. But actually, I think it is the single most important element of sustainability in business. It's what makes people get up in the morning and want to go to work. And if they want to do that, then everything follows. And I really saw this in the pandemic with GSK, where our purpose was to support and improve human health across the globe, and people rose to that. We didn't have a direct role. We would have liked a more direct role in providing a COVID vaccine, but we made our technology available to everybody in the industry, and we provided our products across the world. And we didn't lose a single manufacturing moment, and it was because of the power of purpose. And our engagement scores went up significantly during COVID, because I think everybody understood what mattered by being employed by GSK. And then with the separation, we were able to re-articulate the cultural values that went with that, which was how do we deliver on our purpose? And it has been hugely rewarding. And I'm definitely a convert on that as a critical business driver. And actually, if you can't articulate it, and it doesn't have to be as easy as it is, for a healthcare company, but if you can't articulate it, then your value proposition to stakeholders and employers is diminished.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. So the purpose is really about that glue that holds everybody's interests.
Yes.
And it's the economic as well as the stakeholder, the investors, as well as employees, as well as customers, as well as suppliers. I absolutely get that. And you alluded to the S being a real big focus coming through on the COVID as a result of the pandemic. And I hear a lot about the focus on the S. We've been talking about E and the net zero, but there is a real spotlight on social responsibility. And I wanted to just get your reflections on what you think business's role is in that space, aside from what we do within our business.
I think it's huge. I think you're right in pointing out that the E in ESG. We've had some time to internalize that, but I think we're only beginning to realize the power of S, and it really is the power, which is, what is your social contribution and how do you improve society? And it is actually, that is the difference that GSK can make. Our pursuit of global health, and it's not just pursuit of health where people can afford to pay, or in advanced markets where people, that's not global health. And I'll give you a really powerful example. I think one of the gems within GSK is the HIV business. And the motto there is nobody left alone to live with HIV. And of course, our business economically and financially is driven out of the US, as all pharma businesses. But that's less than 10% of the world's population that suffers from HIV or is exposed to HIV. We launched this year, the next generation HIV therapeutic. Within 7 months, we licensed it to be available around the world. So, within 7 months of launching it within the US, we'd licensed it to be available in Africa and are now going through the process of making it available. I'd say 80% of our HIV business is delivered under WHO terms. And that, I think, that's a social aspiration. Where your products and services are available around the world, and of course if you can protect them, you have an obligation. You have a responsibility for the world to benefit from that. And that's just been that's the joy of GSK. 1/3 of the children around the world get a GSK vaccination. And that is the joy of this industry.
Wow, that is amazing. So you just talked about the pace of change, the pace of innovation around development of drugs and medicines. And I guess, when you have such a responsibility for society, like 1/3 of children, that's a big responsibility. The risk and reward in the pharmaceutical business is really really important balance to have. How do you manage that culturally? Because you need to have the ambition and risk appetite, but there's also the risk reward. Things will succeed, things may not succeed. How do you manage that culturally within an organization that has so much focus on it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And actually it goes back to, the determination of around the new GSK and why it needed to be different from the old GSK. The one thing we haven't changed and we've probably extended is what I've just described, sort of the social global health ethos, which is a very big part of the purpose of GSK. But that purpose or that aspect of the business is only possible if you perform. And so that wasn't the case in the old GSK. And this is the wonderful, advances that Emma and the management team have made, that they have made GSK really competitive. And I think that if you do perform, you can have more freedom as to how you allocate your resources, but you can't allocate resources if you're not if you're not generating value for all stakeholders, including shareholders. It's their money. And if you're not returning value to them, you can't go and spend it. So I think, it is still very much, part of a performance-driven model. And we have significantly improved our performance. And, we're allocating over the course of the coming years, $1 billion to support the needs of, people in disadvantaged societies, whether it's products or research or collaborations or partnerships. But it starts with, you've got to perform. There's no easy way through this.
And you hit a really, the next thing I was going to ask you about leadership, because it's an incredible leadership team you have. And a lot of that's under the leadership of you as chair of the board. And I just wanted to turn my focus to boards. You have a reputation of being a completely transformative leader, right? And all the roles that you've had across the sector and previously before, you've really led big seismic change. Can I just ask you about how you have seen, or what do you think, or how do you think the role of boards has changed over that period?
It is changing. And clearly there's a lot of frustration about the perception of imposed governance on boards. And but I remember when I joined GSK, I made it very clear that good governance was a byproduct of good performance. And I didn't want to be known, and still don't want to be known, for running a board that ticks every conceivable box. I want to run a board of a company that delivers what I've just been describing. And I think it is primarily a case of prioritization and allocation of the time. We do consider ourselves a new company, and we've tried to approach it by refreshing everything that we do. And one of the things that we are in the process of doing is redefining the role and purpose of the board and what our deliverables are over the 5 years. And actually, I don't think governance is on that list or anywhere near that list. We will deliver that performance to the highest possible standards, but I'm not going to spend the board's time on that. And so I think, if you complain about it too much, I think you might not have got your priorities in quite the right way. So I think it comes back to, are you in control of the fundamentals? And of course, the first thing the board has to do is ensure it has a clear strategy and an outstanding CEO and management team, and I've definitely got both of those.
Fabulous. I'm really excited about the future for GSK as we look forward. I want to just turn to a little bit about you, if that's okay. If you could go back in time, what bit of advice would you give your younger self?
I think if my younger self thought I'd be sitting here describing this, I wouldn't have believed it. And even if I believed half of it, I might have relaxed a little bit more and maybe been a little less driven. And still am, actually. I remember, my father always used to say, when will you retire? And I said, well, I'll retire when I'm finished. He said, well, what will you have to do when you're finished? I said, I don't know, and I'm still not finished. But I think, of course, these things do come at a cost. And, people that say, I don't ever have a problem that say, people who say they want a work-life balance. I've made my choices. It's not balanced. It is not balanced. And of course, we all know which part of the balance suffers. It's friends and family. And I think if I'd have known I was going to be here, I might have balanced it a little differently in my early years.
The beauty of hindsight, John.
Yes.
Beauty
Oh,
of
I know.
hindsight. But hopefully our listeners will be listening to you and hopefully take something away from that. We've talked about sustainability and growth, economy, health, etc. What do you do to sort of sustain yourself?
The biggest influence outside of work is the work my wife and I, my family, do in Africa. And, we have a charitable foundation in Uganda that provides education to, all the people that I've described in the underprivileged part of the world. And that's my reset button. I was there 10 days ago. And if ever, life appears too stressful, you think you've got your priorities right, well, those people tell you what really matters in life. And, the fact that I'm able to do it with my wife and my children and some wonderful trustees that we have is a pure joy. It really is. And that's where I get my life driver from.
Wow, what an inspiring end to this. I just wanted to say thank you so much, John, for sharing your perspectives. It's been an absolute privilege to speak to you today. What I've taken away, though, is that real strong sense of purpose in your personal life, from what you've just talked about, purpose in what you do with your organisation. It's not just about governing, it's about doing the bigger thing, and actually the social contribution and improvement to society. That really comes out really loud and clear. Thank you for everything you do as a champion for the sector, and we're incredibly lucky to have you as a loud voice for the UK life sciences sector, and hopefully through the success of GSK see the impact you have globally too. So thank you very much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.